hey
Yeah,
Nick,
all right, we're
what
gonna be
about
listening to
this?
some
Should
Nick
we do
Fuentes,
this?
and
Is it over, Nick?
follow
And
me
people kind of look
on
to you
Kick,
as the
Mr.
de facto
Mario
leader.
R. Let me know.
And I think
Right?
that's
And I'm
totally
playing
fair
this in
because
the
you've
background, but
really shown your
you guys should be able to
predictability. You've
hear
shown that you
the.
have a handle on domestic politics and you have a
Hold on,
great
my bad.
lay of the land, read of the land.
Oh,
Um,
come on.
and
So it's basically the future of the movement with Nick Fuentes. Follow AARVOLL. Let me know if you guys want to listen to him more often, of course. And we're gonna be listening to some of Nick Fuentes, and I'll be playing some Clash Royale real quick. I just won with Mr. Vast Daddy 1988. Fuck. Yeah, I'm screen mirroring it, but I'm playing in the background. I'm also gonna be listening to this. So
I
just let me
guess,
know. I guess
you
I have
you didn't
OCD if you
immediately
guys want
act
to
on my
call it like that. So
suggestions.
it is
I
what it
got a
is.
little bit defensive about that. And so I'll accept my part of that blame. And I think it's good to be able to move forward and get over old beefs. So I appreciate, you wanting to reconcile and coming on here.
Yeah, absolutely. I even when we were in the middle of the beef, I said you're a brilliant guy. I'm a huge fan of your content. Keith Woods actually put me onto your stuff. I believe I had seen you around, but he put me onto some of your content about music and IQ and some other interesting takes, some of your stuff about Neoplatonism. And so I was always a fan. I watched your videos. And it didn't help. My first instinct is always just to hit back as hard as possible. So maybe we should have both had a resolve to kind of squash things before we turned it into a major beef. But likewise, I'm glad that we're able to sit down and get together again, because I think what you're doing is important. I think what I'm doing is important. I think that, we should have a full spectrum of different approaches. So I'm a big fan of what you're doing, not just with your content, but also with the intentional community. So I agree. I think, in the course of these things, we have egos, personalities. And by egos, I just mean, we, as big personalities and smart guys, we want things done a certain way. There's always going to be inevitably clashes and little beefs and things like that, and I think that's fine actually, as long as you ultimately come together. So I'm glad we're able to do that as well.
Right, and I feel the energy of coming together, uniting as a movement. For a long time, like, the movement seemed like a misnomer. It was divided factions, but now there's a sense of a common enemy, especially with the collapse of faith in Trump. There is a new realization that we collectively have to organize something to replace MAGA, and you've been live to that fact for a long time now. And so naturally, people are looking to you, and myself, I want to look to what you see for the next 10, 20 years. We might not agree on all points in this discussion, but I definitely want to stay open to different paths. Like you said, we don't all have to do one thing, but even if we're specializing in different areas, we can still find ways of, collaborating as organs within a larger body, and constituting that larger body is really what I'm concerned with. So I've been talking with a lot of new people, different leaders in our scene, and it's really refreshing, and I'm really optimistic. So that being said, where do you see this kind of power vacuum now heading towards in the next year, around the time of the midterms, in the next election? Like, where is the right wing going?
Well, I would have had a very different take on this even a few months ago, because I think this Jeffrey Epstein thing, and obviously this is something we're just talking about this week.
Jeffrey Epstein thing. Yeah.
So this is just what's right in front of us at the moment. But a few months ago, I would have had a completely different take about where, like, the GOP is going based on where Trump is at. I would have said that in the next election, everyone in his cabinet's going to be running. They're all going to be going for the primary. J.D. Vance, Rubio, Kristi Noem, the usual suspects. And I thought that the kind of considerations that would shape the race would all be based on Trump's popularity. J.D. Vance would be considered the heir apparent because he's involved in this administration. He's on the ticket. He's in the White House, or the Naval Observatory, actually, in the administration, And I would think that all these other people in the cabinet, well, they would be kind of trying to run early, and they'd be trying to outflank him because he would be the obvious choice. But now, given what it's kind of thrown a wrench in things, what a failure everything's been in the past 6 months. And so I wouldn't say that it's a foregone conclusion that Trump is going to be politically toxic in 4 years or 3.5 years. But it's a lot more likely than it was maybe 6 months ago after he wins this unbelievable comeback victory landslide against Kamala. You would have thought everybody be racing to be a part of it. Now it seems like everyone's racing away from it. And you see even like Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, they are always criticizing Trump, even now for bombing Iran, which you wouldn't think. You think it'd be the opposite. You think Trump would be criticizing them for this, criticizing it for not releasing the Epstein tapes. And the reason this is relevant, for people that think this is just, talking shop about politics and silly stuff, Trump obviously has shaped the right wing for the past 10 years. He's been the central figure, central organizing force. And, on the one hand, he's sort of brought everybody with him and he's led this huge Republican political victory. On the other hand, him being in the middle of it has prevented any other challengers. You can't really define what the right wing is, because you run up against the hegemon, you run up against the Leviathan of Trump, who dominates the landscape. And, it's been partly a good thing when Trump is pushing on immigration or some good issues, but I think mostly it's been a bad thing because it prevents us from creating. And in particular, he, I think, has almost ceded his legacy to the worst elements. I would come up against a lot of these Trump supporters and say, I'm a Trump voter, but I'm effectively a white nationalist and I criticize Israel and this, that, and the other. And all of the Republicans could credibly say, that's not MAGA. MAGA is multiracial. MAGA is pro-Israel. MAGA is pro-gay. And after 10 years, where Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham and Nikki Haley and others have been so close into the fold, it's like they have a better claim than we do. So you're going to them and saying, well, spiritually, what's more America first? What's more in line with the Trump victory? But as time has gone on, it's like, okay, but they're at Mar-a-Lago. They're getting the appointments, the endorsements. They have the access. They define the doctrine. And so, whereas in 2016, Trumpism was against the mainstream establishment right, and you had the alternative right, and it was sort of every vector of attack against the establishment right. And Trump was kind of pushing that along. Now it's having the opposite effect, where it's a moderating force. Everyone is trying to push it forward, and Trump is kind of sitting in the middle saying, you can go no further. This is pro-Israel. Michael Tracy's going to troll you on Twitter and say, oh, you're a MAGA Republican? Well, he's the biggest pro-Israel president ever. And you'd have to deal with that contradiction. So going into 28, with him leaving politics, that's going to be the biggest change that we've seen in this decade. He transformed politics. Obviously, he's a lame duck. So to me, that's sort of the biggest thing on my radar. And before we kind of address that, I don't know, I don't want to ramble too much. Do you have anything to say about kind of where we are in this moment?
Well, yeah, I do agree that Trump, for the time being, is a retarding force on the right. And it is disappointing because I was there in 2016 and I was excited about Trump. I watched The Apprentice before he ran. Like immediately before he ran, I was watching a marathon of Apprentice episodes. And so I got very into that energy and I supported him, around the time that you did up until 2018, 2019. And then I was kind of disappointed. I voted for him in the last 2 elections anyway. I don't think that his political utility is totally used up, though. I think as far as direction and setting a new agenda, we can't look to Trump at that big picture level. But he has appointed a lot of conservative judges. He still will kind of set the tone in a conservative direction. Which is good for people like me who, I might end up being sued for this community. Our case might go to the Supreme Court. So to have Trump there as this figurehead of an old conservative backlash that now is running out of steam, there's still some steam left, though, that can be used for purposes like unraveling some of the Civil Rights Act laws, DEI, affirmative action, Fair Housing Act. I think there's some potential there. I'm just not exactly sure how that's organized at a national scale. My approach is very much bottom up. I do believe we need a top-down organizational approach. I think, infiltrating the Republican Party, influencing elections and things like that. That has value, but it's not my forte. It's not something that I'm particularly good at. What I can do is organize communities of like-minded people and kind of stake out a claim for this is where we have a right to defend freedom of association. This is where we have a right to white identity politics, which people have kind of played with, but no one has really done that kind of hard line approach saying like, no, we're having a white community. This is where we're drawing that line in the sand.
Thank you for subscribing.
By forcing the issue, it's probably going to come to court, and then that will make it a matter of public discourse, and then will influence things in that way. So I've sort of staked out a position where I will be either a sacrificial lamb or a landmine for the establishment, and that's my approach. But apart from that, like, I do think something new needs to take place in the Republican Party. A new figurehead is needed. You're too young to run for president, unfortunately, and I don't know who else is really out there who can fill those shoes. Are you paying attention to anyone who you think might fill that vacuum?
No, and I don't think there is anybody, honestly. And what makes it so difficult is you sort of have, unfortunately, it seems this big splinter between, you could argue, the more pro-white side, and you could say like the more counter-Semitic or counter-Jewish side, which is really interesting. It's really become a problem in the past few years where, of course, all of the nativist, like immigration restrictionist, white nationalist, white separatist types, you think of guys like Peter Brimelow, Jared Taylor, Scott Greer, the usual suspects. There is like a capital W, capital N white nationalist movement that has sort of been around for a long time. And these guys have all coalesced around Trump, and in particular seem to be deeply affiliated with this Israeli network. They congregate around the National Conservative Conference, which is Yoram Hazony's outfit, around Paul Gottfried at Chronicles, who, even though he's a paleocon, he was in favor of bombing Iran, and he is Jewish, says he hates the Nazis and all this kind of stuff, and very sympathetic to all of these other, ethno-nationalist movements in Europe, in particular, like in Hungary or Germany, where they have an extremely strong Zionist element there. And of course, these guys are now the ones that are saying Stephen Miller's the Hebrew hammer, and if you're anti-Israel, you're a third worldist, and all this kind of stuff. On the other side, you have a lot of people that are being very critical of Jewish power and Israel, which is a big part of our predicament, but they are embracing, and I wish this wasn't the case. I wish this was pure slander, but it does seem to be true. There is some element of third worldism or leftism on the Israel critical side. You have a lot of people where race consciousness is not a priority at all. It's not, maybe they're not even ideologically race essentialists or race realists or anything like this. If they are, certainly it's very low in terms of their priorities. And so when you think about 2028 or even the midterms for that matter, my project in the past few cycles is I thought I would identify the more radical members that are running for the House or that are even running for local office for that matter and try to support them. But what you find is there's almost nobody on a national level or, even in a semi-national level who is kind of with us on both sides of the coin, that's kind of ideologically has it all together. And we don't need to be picky about it, but you kind of just need the basic, like, they're going to be taking our own side, so to speak, not in the pocket of Israel. They're going to be, more pro-white than your average boomer, more conservative than your average Heritage Foundation free market guy. And there just isn't anybody like that. And so I'm a little bit disappointed because I thought after 10 years of Trump, we would have had during one of these cycles in 18, 20, 22, 24, 26, you get one AOC of the right, who at the minimum could be like a rallying point for our side, who's going to bring attention to the issues and kind of direct the energy and be a bit of a lightning rod, as she has been for like the progressive side and becomes like a standard bearer. We don't have that. Matt Gaetz, Madison Cawthorn, these people flamed out. Paul Gosar disappeared. The best we have is Marjorie Greene, and I don't think anyone's looking to her to be an intellectual spokeswoman or anything like this. So I'm a little bit, I think we on our side have a lot on the, if you want to call it the entryist or infiltrator side, we have a lot of work to do in the next few years to kind of find leadership on a political level who's going to kind of take over. So that's kind of my take on where we are in the next couple of years.
So we basically have to start from scratch, it sounds like.
Yes.
Now, what about Elon Musk's potential third party? You have people like Joe Rogan, who is now kind of a soft critic of Israel. It is, a limited hangout. They won't go all the way and question Jewish power in general, but they are critical of the state of Israel, and that's new, Elon Musk is relatively philo-Semitic. I wouldn't say he's aligned with us by and large, but I'm interested in the tech bro oligarchy that has kind of come to dominate the right. And now recently there's been a break, and now there's this kind of rogue power faction that got a taste of political influence, and I think they don't want to give that up. So is there a way that we can even work with that, if not explicitly supporting it? Can we play that momentum towards something else? Like Elon Musk talks about creating smart cities. I'm a big believer not just in white intentional community to preserve our demographics, but also intentional community as a way of organizing in the face of an increasingly complex economic landscape, where just going to college and getting some specialized degree is no guarantee that you're going to get a job, either because it'll be outsourced to Indians or because AI will be able to do it better. And we're not very good at predicting what AI is going to be like in 5 years. So if you go start a degree, by the time you graduate, it could just be useless. Whereas intentional communities, building our own economic parallel systems, we don't have to wait for opportunities to arise in the mainstream economy. Instead, we kind of take control over creating new ecological niches for ourselves, so to speak. Now, I think there's that alignment. Andrew Torba also talks about creating intentional communities like that. So I'm like spiritually aligned with some of the stuff they're doing. What do you think can be done with that faction?
Well, I think that it's kind of hard to say because they're really not with us ideologically. Like Elon and Joe Rogan, they're sort of splitting from Trump. They're less right wing than he is, even on immigration. Like I consider them to be almost center left. Elon is not, at least for America, appears to be, believes that race matters or that our heritage matters, or he's an immigrant or anything like that. And same thing with Joe Rogan. Like they are effectively like center left libertarians, the Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, even the tech bro, the Jacob Hellberg, David Sachs, these types. And I think that if anything, they might even try to hurt us. I think that, like, especially in December, that whole H-1B debacle was very telling. When Elon Musk said, if you're against these H-1Bs, we're going to take you out root and stem. You're real racist. You are the problem. And I guess I wonder, to the extent that any kind of white nativism gains momentum as Trump maybe crests, I wonder if it draws more attention and then draws more ire from them. If it becomes more, I think about almost like Charlottesville. Charlottesville was kind of like, here is a pro-white movement, and it wasn't the best optics. Obviously, it could have been handled better. But the minute that kind of splashed onto the scene as distinct from Trumpism, everyone took turns beating it down. Everybody said they ran away from it as quickly as possible. And I almost feel like that's going to happen again. I feel like the Jubilee video a couple days ago was almost like a prefiguring of this, where it's like everybody's sort of emboldened. Everybody sort of has this effect where they say there's this exuberance of the victory of censorship kind of going away, all these other things. And they start to say, hello, world, we are radical right wingers. And yeah, we are fascists. And I don't think people like Elon or the general public or the center left types, a lot of these people, even that voted for Trump, they're not down for that. I don't think there's a big constituency for that. And it's like you said, I think actually that Trump has more utility than people maybe think, because the second that Trump disappears as a figure, it is, I think, a lot of the right-wing people are going to coalesce and consolidate around someone that is much more left-wing, that is not going to be able to get away with some of these things that Trump was able to get away with because of the power of his personality, the cult of personality. So I think the America Party, if anything, we're going to fall on the side of the Republicans in that dispute. The America Party is going to be technologist or technocratic or both. They're going to be deficit hawks. They're going to be about good governance. They're going to be not engaging in culture war. They're going to strive to avoid anything racial. You know, the party was founded by 2 Indians. They're on the paperwork or whatever. Whereas the Republican Party, I think that is going to actually go on as the center of any kind of culturally right-wing element. So we might be counting, but I think it's a good thing to have a split. I sort of welcome the America Party because, like you say about smart cities pointing towards intentional communities, kind of like as a concept, in the same way, a viable third party that has a big backer and big money, maybe that points towards the breakup of this like 2-party, and I hate when people say 2-party system, but maybe it points towards there could be some innovation on that side. There could be a more right-wing party and a more left right-wing party or a more center right-wing party. I don't think that's the worst thing for us. Overall, I don't think the America Party is going to be a home for white racialists or, white people to want a homeland, but it may shake up politics enough where we could get something different, at least, because the options aren't working.
Well, you can leverage the ascendancy of the one against the other and make demands that otherwise, if there was just a unified right wing, you could not make. I think the key demands that are actually achievable are rolling back affirmative action, rolling back the Fair Housing Act, some civil rights laws. I don't know how realistic from a legal perspective it is. I've talked with lawyers who say basically the Civil Rights Act is like a second constitution. It's so deeply embedded in the way our legal system works. However, if we can mobilize a radical new kind of grassroots coalition that can be used as a bargaining chip against the Republicans and the America Party, then we could maybe get them to back some radical new agendas that otherwise just wouldn't be possible, like explicitly challenging the Civil Rights Act. We had that, was it a Supreme Court ruling about affirmative action a few months ago? So it's not impossible. I think going against mass immigration, H-1Bs, is not as likely to gain traction just because you're arguing directly against their perceived interest. Elon Musk needs H-1Bs, or in his mind he does, right? Whether that's the case is another matter, but I tend to think along the lines of what battles are actually winnable and where can you find some common cause with these people. So the tech bros, Musk fired all these women and various minorities at X when he took over, and I'm sure he would like more freedom to do that and freedom to hire whom he wanted. So that, I think there's some room for working with that faction on that front, and then you could maybe play the immigration side more with the typical Republican base. So what do you think about that? And then maybe we can get into, how do we organize a not just a voting bloc, but a political bloc, a real active political bloc that can leverage this split?
Well, I think you're totally right about that. And I think that, in order for us to achieve our political objectives, this is something that Nate Fisher wrote. He's pretty smart. I follow him on Twitter. And he said this recently, which kind of spoke to me. He said that, and this is me talking, but it's his idea. When we talk about our goals, voting bloc, and we want our own land and things like that, it almost presupposes that there is a we, that there is an organized we that is capable of acting collectively for the purpose of large projects. And I think that, almost talking about, and obviously you and I are both starting somewhere, we're both starting something, and you're doing the intentional community, I'm doing a show and have this political thing going on. But I think that it almost puts the cart before the horse. We almost need to work on building the movement first, in the sense of, for us to compete on any level with any of these groups, it does require money. It does require a sort of professional network. It does require sinecure jobs and positions, because people, if you think about, we want people to be working in this forever. Well, people need jobs and homes to support their families. They need community. Without kind of a much larger movement, without almost like an economy of scale, you see what happened like with Jubilee the other day, like that Pine Sap guy. He goes on the show. He says, yeah, I'm a fascist and I disagree with you. And boom, fired from his job. And like, unfortunately, this is the story basically of our movement for the entire time, which is you want to scale it up. You want to act collectively, but people participate in it and then they lose their jobs. Or there's maybe a handful of jobs and there's some money, but it's not a lot of money and you're kind of trapped in it forever. If you go to work for Racist Incorporated, you're never going to have a normal job ever again. You're going to make $35,000 a year on the generosity of one or two donors forever. And that's not really attractive for the best and brightest. And you need the best and brightest. You think about a similar movement like the Zionists or something else, and you literally have world-class human capital that are attracted to it, and they're attracted to it for religious reason and other things. And it's a little bit of a different situation. But I do think that you almost sort of need something to kind of reach a critical mass before even these become possible, where you do have enough resources, whether it's enough billionaires, enough millionaires. They have these synecured positions at various companies, maybe across the country, where if people get exposed, it gets too hot, they can fall back on. There almost needs to be a critical mass of as a society, for lack of a better word, first, before it even becomes viable to attract talent, to push collectively. And I think that's kind of where we're in the middle of right now, where it seems like our ideas have reached enough of maybe a mass appeal where you can start to bring in large numbers of people or very high elite human capital type people that might be interested in building something from the bottom up. But I think we sort of need to work on building the movement first as a vehicle before we talk about kind of building our dream, city or our dream, whatever. That's sort of been my idea for the past 10 years, because I saw Trump win. And then, of course, he got surrounded by the interests. He won the election, but how do you staff the White House? How do I get guys that are going to run the Pentagon for us, that are going to run the various organs of government? Well, I got to go to the neocons. I got to go to the usual suspects. And then they fill up the White House. And you say, well, who's going to write the policy? All the usual think tanks. Who's going to do all the activities of government? Well, it turns out we just have the one guy in the center, and it's going to be everybody else from every other administration is going to be running it inside the government, outside the government. And so I thought in 2017, where are the nonprofits? Where are the think tanks? Where are the experts on our side that are going to come together? And no one was doing that. And I thought, first, we kind of need to red pill a lot of people so we could start to draw on, even if it's 1% of them, to be the movement. And that's been kind of going slowly and steadily for 10 years. That's kind of where my head is at in terms of what's kind of the immediate outlook, is kind of creating and finding those people and bringing them into a network. And then you have your first Congress, you have your first, Socialist International, your first Zionist International, but for our types. I think that's kind of where we need to go with it.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a matter of how you get there from here. And I look to examples like, on the one hand, the Freemasons, which is more an elite approach, and they successfully revolutionized all the governments of Europe, right? They ended the old aristocracies, brought in democracies and rule of the merchant class. And they did that through effectively think tanks, ideological propaganda, controlling media in the form of plays and things like that back then. On the other hand, you have the Muslim Brotherhood, started by a teacher in Egypt who basically created a fraternal society to provide education, healthcare, basic services that the incompetent government could not provide. Similarly, in the case of the madrasas in Pakistan under British rule, they started these religious education centers. They acted as community centers, And I mean, that is part of why they were able to throw the British off ultimately. And their influence extended into Afghanistan and formed the basis of the Mujahideen and the Taliban. And the Taliban defeated us, ultimately. So I think there's something to these two approaches that it can be done simultaneously. But on the one hand, you can build a movement by providing for people directly what the government cannot. And intentional communities are a natural way of doing that. Also, community centers, schools, think tanks, and you don't necessarily need millionaires or billionaires to support you in doing that. Like, we crowdfunded this land here for our first community, and we're getting large numbers of relatively, middle-class, ordinary people together to organize land buys in other parts of the country. I'd like to extend that into community centers in more urban areas. What we lack really is spaces where we can congregate productively and where we can spend our time productively. So that's more the bottom-up side of it. On the Freemasonic side, I think we do need an openness to discourse among all of our leaders. Just that's an attitude issue. We've, like you and I, had a beef and we weren't communicating for a little while there. And I just see it happen way too often. And it sort of just has to be an axiom in our sphere that we all show up for that Congress of ideas. I don't know how to enforce that other than by example and saying we're not going to tolerate so-called leaders in our movement who won't speak to each other. Because here you have, different figures, hundreds, thousands of people supporting them, putting their hopes in them. And then we have another guy over here who they agree on 99% of the issues, but the two leaders won't actually meet up and discuss. The Masons were really good at that. So I think that's the key to unlocking that top-down elite human capital organizing structure. And then the bottom-up stuff, like that's what I'm more interested in. And that's relatively easy. It's just you have to get out there and physically organize it. I also think those physical spaces can be used for both purposes. So once we secure these community centers, camps, schools, recreational lands, then conferences won't be so occasional. They won't involve traveling across the country every time. There will be things going on in your area you can go contribute to directly, including think tanks and things of that nature. So that's kind of the vision that I'm looking at now for realizing it.
The problem, I think, with the only issue with that, and we've discussed this before, it's kind of funny, we talked about it when you came up here, is like, I think that we have to give due consideration to the fact that our enemies are trying to thwart us so intensely all the time. And I know you've considered that. It's happened to you recently where, Reddit found out about the whites only community. And they said, how can we get this shut down? How are we going to disorganize this whole thing? And it's like, speaking from my experience, having done a live stream, when I got into politics, I said to myself, we basically just need to emulate what the conservatives are doing. We'll just do a parallel, everything that they're doing. We'll do, if they have Turning Point, we'll have America First students. If they have their stream, we'll have ours. He ran into is when you do America First students, they're going to dox everybody that's there. And all these 19-year-olds at state schools or, even the elite universities are going to say, I want a nice job. I need to be attracted to money and status and these things. And if I'm associated with Nick Fuentes, it's kind of over before it even begins. I don't want to be anywhere near this. And then you do a conference, you do AFPAC instead of the Turning Point or CPAC. And people go, but everybody's concerned about, is there a journalist? Is a journalist going to be there? Paul Ingrassia, he got nominated for a position in the government, and he was literally passing by one of my speeches outside the Turning Point Convention Center, and some journalist takes a picture of him, and now it's in the record of the U.S. Senate. Why were you outside this rally? Why were you passing by? And you do, even for that matter, a live stream in public or on the show, and people that leave a comment or leave a super chat, or people that are, might be in the live stream now and again, they get freaked out about it too, even being next to me. And so there is something to say about like that. What you're saying is the right approach, But there is this kind of paradox, this like catch-22 that we're in, where it's like we want to organize, but if we organize in the open, they're going to kind of strike at the shepherd and the sheep scatter. You know, they're going to come in hard, they're going to use reputational slander and take away people's jobs, and the whole thing is going to disorganize. But you kind of need to be out in the open to attract people. I mean, it's just sort of, if you want to have anything at scale, it's involved in that way. People are going to need to show up. There's going to be large numbers of people. You can't keep it a secret if we're going to have millions of people involved. On the other hand, if you're decentralized and discreet, if you keep it quiet and you do Faraday bags for the phones, and you know, you don't reveal the location of the conference, and you kind of do it underground, well, then you don't get the left exposing you and thwarting your plans. But it also limits the growth because you can't advertise it, and it's like a secret society. And, you know, if people kind of bail or betray, they could blow up the whole operation. They could burn it down on their way out. And so that's why I kind of get to this idea of critical mass, where it's like, at least for me, I still have to move very quietly. Anyone that supports me, anyone that associates with me, they still have to be extremely quiet, because if they're in any way public, they're going to get their lives destroyed. But we're kind of hoping and waiting that once the network kind of quietly expands out to a certain limit, it'll almost become like we don't need to be quiet anymore in a certain sense. And that's why I kind of impress the need for, we do need a billionaire. We do need a kind of vast and large movement to serve as like a windfall, a true society, because otherwise it's just too small. They strike at it and the whole thing blows up. You think about even like, let's say I open a community center in a major city like New York or Chicago or LA. If even one person finds out this is the all-white community center for whites only, it's going to be a press story. Local community center found to be tied to white nationalists. You're going to get Antifa, you're going to get the local village, you're going to get, you know, everybody's going to come out and try and disrupt the plans and make it even prohibitive to continue operating. And so that's sort of my, and maybe I'm just like scarred from that experience of 10 years of just like beating back, you know, this irrepressible force. Eventually we're going to need to kind of bypass that, but I think we need to hit sort of a critical mass first, because I don't know, I mean, what has your experience been since, maybe that's a good question for you, since you kind of got a lot of attention recently for your intentional community, what's sort of been, how have they been trying to mess with you?
The main thing they've done is contact government offices. The Fair Housing Commission is the only government office that might be able to try to fine us or create real consequences. And even if that goes through, it's probably going to be like a $15,000 fine for a first offense. But it's very asymmetric in our favor, I believe, because if we go defend ourselves in court and win, we set important legal precedent, and if we lose, okay, we pay 15 grand, which sucks, but we can afford that. Whereas if we kind of open that door and set legal precedent that it's okay to do this sort of thing, that will embolden more people to follow suit, and I think it opens a lot of possibilities. So other than that, I mean, they've contacted media outlets, local media. A lot of people around here now recognize me, which is strange. You know, I've never had that. Nick just dropped out of the call. So here we go. All right. So let me think. We can just stall for a few minutes and see if Nick hops back on. They shut it down. Dang. Figures. All right. Well,
Ow.
What to do? All right, you guys can see me at least now. Well, shoot. Yeah, here's Masad. Chat's right. Also, yeah, I saw that chat that there were audio issues. I'm not the boomer. You are the boomers. You just had to refresh the stream. So, not boomer tech. Often I am. Often it is on my end. So.
Oh. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Awesome. Okay. Not sure what happened. I've never had that before.
Yeah, me neither. All right, where were we? What was the...
Well, I think I was...
talking about how they were messing with you and the... the White Commune, the White Village.
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they contacted media, they contacted civil rights groups and things like that. Some groups made statements condemning us, which isn't all that consequential. So it hasn't been that effective for them. It's largely just backfired. We got hundreds of new applicants and tens of thousands of dollars in support out of it. So, I thought Jews were supposed to be good at strategic thinking. Generally, they are. In this case, this one Jew on Reddit was making the most noise about it. He started like 20 different threads on different subreddits. I guess thank you to that guy, really. Yeah, as far as like how they could attack us, though, clearly the law is very complex, and there are always different angles for them to try. Even if we, and we have been, even if they hire. Sorry, 1 second here. Let me. My camera has changed. All right. Even if we hired, high-priced civil rights lawyers, they might find some way to get us on development law that we hadn't paid attention to yet. And we've done our due diligence and researched every area that we possibly could, like what's relevant in starting a company. So securities laws might come into play. Obviously, yeah, discrimination law, civil rights law, the Fair Housing Act itself. And it's not like we're trying to get around these laws. We're just trying to abide by the law as far as that's possible. Now we have a $50,000 plus legal budget, and we're hiring high-priced lawyers in all of these different areas, and we're trying to build out a framework that's going to be replicable and that will work for people in different situations. So it's spurring us to kind of preemptively patch any holes that might exist in our overall position. So I think overall it has been good. But yeah, like, what do you do about that fact that when you organize at scale, they will target you, they will try to take away your employment? Part of it, I think we have to realize that if we're going to succeed, it's not going to be a zero sacrifice route. Like, we're going to have to make some sacrifices either to our quality of life or where we live or the options that we have. Some people think that keeping your options open is liberating or empowering or makes you happy, but studies actually show that when people have many different options to choose from, what they ultimately choose, they enjoy less. Like if you go to the supermarket and there are 10 different flavors of toothpaste, whatever you pick, you're not going to enjoy as much as if there was just 2 flavors of toothpaste and you went with one, or if you were given a tube of toothpaste. So I think we need to look at it in that light. Like, in order to organize, we won't all be able to work in New York City or okay, someone else is somehow. Oh, Masad joined the call. You have to start.
No, what the hell?
You have
That's
to
a
start another
no.
call because the screen capture got the name.
Oh no.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna send you another.
All right. Okay.
Uh,
Ah. What the heck did happen? Oh, he's such an L. He's such a boomer. Oh, get him out of here, Harry.
Got in due to an unforced error. It's like crazy symbolism.
yeah. Okay, I'll acknowledge that. Yeah. So we
I'm
do have to be
speaking.
very careful. No, we should be careful in the way that we structure. That's kind of the approach we've taken. a lot of legal consultation. We have to have legal advocacy groups. We should really, like, the movement generally should have a staff of lawyers that we pay through some kind of monthly subscription fee, right? I've learned of one organization that's doing something like that. The PMA, Return to the Land, we're planning on doing a higher tier of membership where some portion of the monthly payment for that will go towards paying ultimately a lawyer that'll be on staff, not just to defend us in the case that we're brought to court, but also to proactively continually do legal research. And we should have teams of lawyers. I think a lot of different services we could also provide for ourselves, like healthcare. Fraternal benefit societies can provide health insurance to their members, and if we have our own private clubs where there are also requirements to be healthy, work out, so you might not qualify, but work out, eat vegetables and stuff. No, you look very healthy. I mean, I don't know what your routine is exactly, but
Thanks.
So I think those sorts of things, there are a lot of opportunities, not just worrying about being prosecuted, but being forced to organize. It's like having options taken away, in a way, I think is good. Like, in order to have a white intentional community, we had to form a corporation and have bylaws for that corporation. We had to have like a charter for our PMA, and we had to put a lot of thought into, okay, what are the principles that we actually want to organize around? And so it's going to constrain what we can do, but that constraint will concentrate our forces on things that are actually productive. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Also, we are getting better at learning how to do this in anonymous ways. I know that you're not a big fan of Patriot Front, but I've become familiar with their operation recently. And, maybe optically, we don't all have to support the way they're going about it, but logistically, they have a very smart way of preserving the anonymity of their members. And they haven't had members doxxed over, more than 7 years operating. They haven't had their members arrested except for like one very exceptional case, and then nothing really came of it. And yeah, they could get caught up on some kind of charge that they're not anticipating yet, but they have lawyers on their side who are proactively looking and making sure that we're doing that due diligence and not running afoul of the law. So basically, the answer is simply that we have to be very careful and pay a lot of money to lawyers. But there are lawyers on our side, so we can pay our own guys, we can provide work for our own guys, and then in communities like this, the larger we scale, the more work opportunities we create for our people rather than relying solely on the system. Some people can work remote jobs. Some people can work construction in communities like these, where we can build our own infrastructure instead of paying $300,000 or $500,000 to the banks and construction companies that are not affiliated with us at all, who aren't on our side. We can pay our own people. I think of it like in terms of real-time strategy games where you have idle villagers all over the map. You paid to create these people. If you don't click the idle villager button and locate them and put them to task, you're not going to win. Like, that's one of the most important things you can do is check, where are the idle workers? And we have a lot of people who are not employing. So we have to click that idle worker button and find roles for everyone that we have. And if that means, getting them in formal organizations where there's some risk of possibly being doxxed, well, I think that's an acceptable risk, because you could be doxxed as an individual. They could find your browsing history. They could figure out what you believe just because of some unforced error you made. You posted the wrong picture to Facebook, or they tracked you down by word of mouth. So I think there's no getting around the risk of being a dissident. I don't think that our position has to remain so dissident or so culturally unacceptable. The larger we get and the more vocal we get, the more people will tolerate it. Locals here, everyone I've spoken with, typically what they'll say is, I wouldn't necessarily choose to live there, but that's their right if that's what they want to do. And I think that's the attitude of the average American. So in our position, where we just want to do our own communities, do our own thing, and not molest anyone else, then the American public supports that. In the case of more kind of in-your-face activism, maybe there are higher risks, but I think creating our own spaces, that's very defensible, and it is worth some risk of doxing by joining organizations that will actually allow for it.
Yeah, it's not so much the question of risk, because I think that, to our credit, I think our people have a very high risk tolerance when it comes to things like that. Especially a lot of the young guys, they're too overzealous. A lot of them have a big appetite for, swallowing maybe a lower quality of life or something like that for the sake of the movement, for the sake of the cause. My concern is more how they can render our operation inoperable through political pressure, through other things where it becomes prohibitive. Like, you say, for example, well, we have lawyers and we're going to fight these legal battles. And by the way, I mean, in terms of the intentional community, that is something where you could win a legal precedent. And I think that's absolutely worth taking it to the limit. So I'm not even talking necessarily, strictly speaking, about what you're doing, because you're actually right. It is a gray area legally. You have come up with, you explained it to me pretty well. You have come up with sort of a novel structure, and it should be tested. It should be stress tested in that way. And, either it's impossible and you'll find that out legally, or there'll be a breakthrough and it will be a breakthrough for everybody. So to your credit, I think you're going to fight that battle, and some battles are necessary to fight until the finish, until there's an outcome. But what I'm concerned about is, let's say a Patriot Front reaches a critical mass. Let's say even what you're doing reaches a critical mass, or what any of us are doing. I worry about the scenario where it starts to attract attention and it becomes a crisis. And there's then like a political call. There must be something done about this group or that group or what's happening over here. In other words, we start to win. You almost imagine not the worst case scenario, but first the best case scenario. Okay, let's say it scales. Let's say it gets big. Let's say it turns into something. Well, you have to anticipate that then the Attorney General is going to get a call, shut it down, find a way, and they'll do illegal stuff. We've seen throughout, and you didn't like that I used the example of something like Waco or like Ruby Ridge, and those are not perfect examples. Admittedly, they're not perfect examples at all. But those are instances of, at the end of the day, when the government has the guns, they can just show up and shoot everybody, and they could go up and just disrupt the plans. And, on some level, that's just the battle. That's just a fight that we're in. It's maybe unavoidable on some level. But I guess that's why, for someone like myself, and I said earlier, maybe I'm gun shy from years of doxing and cancellation and all this kind of stuff. I do tend to prefer a more discreet approach, only because that secrecy and operating in the shadows, for me, it gives me so much more wiggle room. Like, we have groypers in so many places, like followers of mine that I'm regularly in touch with. It just wouldn't be possible if we had a membership organization, if we had any kind of public facing activities. And I remember, I'll give you an example, like when we did AFPAC 3 a few years ago, we had 1,200 people show up in the Orlando Marriott. It's their biggest resort, I think, in the whole world. And we had LED video walls, and Jared Taylor was there, and he said, how did you guys even do this? He said, because of course he has been doing American Renaissance for 30 years, and they've chased him out of every venue. The place he landed is this state park in Tennessee. It's the only place that legally they have to let them meet. And the cops show up, they prevent Antifa from storming the compound and everything. And I said, well, we just kind of use secrecy. We're extremely discreet. We're just kind of a little sneaky in the way that we do it. And it's like that discretion affords us such a bigger latitude in terms of possibilities. And you could say maybe it requires two approaches. Like, I certainly think your battle is worth fighting to the finish, and someone's going to have to just tough it, like you said, and tolerate the risk, because this is a battle that's worth seeing it through. But on the other side, I do think that, look, if we want the most brilliant minds, the most brilliant technologists, because I really do believe in, like, we got to get the right people. It's not just any people. It's the right people. Oh, brother. Shabbos Yarvin says the...
Okay. All right. Is there a way to make these private?
I don't know. I don't use this.
I'm just going to have to do another call link and... Great content here.
Foiled again.
Yeah. All right.
Vermin are multiplying.
Link.
All right.
Link coming. Prioritization, stress testing,
right.
Open.
Like,
there we go. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay, so I kind of knew that was gonna happen because right at the beginning when I screen
L
shared
from
it,
him. Not gonna lie.
it almost just happened again, but it didn't.
Still winning. We're
The
still winning.
name
We're
popped up for
on a
like
winning
a split
streak.
second. I was like, somebody's gonna see that, and sure enough, Masad was in there.
Failed again.
Okay. Yeah.
No, dude.
Are you serious?
Brother.
All right. I can't believe this. We'll just have him on the show. How about that?
Yeah. Let's interview Beaner. Where is my cap?
Oh man. Maybe I will call you on Telegram. How about that?
I don't have Telegram on here. Oh, brother. Now we got TMD in the chat.
I'll message you. One minute.
Okay.
It's not a terrible idea, honestly. I may just have to call our losses here and move on. So we could jump on an X space as the part 2. So yeah, for the YouTube replay, the link will be in the description. We're gonna do an X space to finish this out. Thanks everyone for listening on YouTube. Okay. Well, let's see. Are we back? I think
We're so back.
Yeah, we're so back. I believe that's gonna do it, and we're not gonna go over to X. That was not an option. Yeah, the stream is back. We're back on track. Nothing ever happened. This has been a seamless stream so far. All right. So we were talking about legal challenges, the ways they can get us, and yeah, what you're talking about. I think you were just about to say that some battles might be worth like creating organizations and explicitly fighting. Others, maybe a more discreet approach is better. And I also agree that we should pursue both avenues, and it depends on the subject matter. Some things you have to fight it out in the open. Sometimes you can't. So if you want to continue that thought, move on.
Yeah, I just think that we're getting to the point where, obviously, in my opinion, one of the biggest things that Trump did that's positive in our favor is eradicating the wokeness on some level and some of these PC attitudes. Because I think, you know, a lot of people will say we need this like elite strategy. And I'm in agreement in a sense. People say it's not about getting 50% of the population on our side to vote for a thing. Structurally, it's a little bit more complicated than that. However, I do think that in order to reach the, elite people or high human capital people, it does involve casting a very wide net. In order to get, let's say it is 1 out of 100 people or something, or 1 out of 1,000, it does involve casting a wide net, but also changing the attitudes of society and making it so that these viewpoints are no longer taboo and people are kind of willing to explore them or tolerate them to a greater extent. And like you said, in Arkansas, or in your, you know, community, your neighborhood or whatever, of the local villagers or something, when they say, well, let them do what it is they want to do. Maybe culturally it's always been like that, but certainly the country overall, I think, is closer to accepting our position than they were 10 years ago. And so I think that we're kind of still waiting on things to change a little bit for it to be possible to organize a little bit more effectively. We're kind of waiting on simultaneously for things to reach a point where there's more acceptance in the mainstream, but also there's enough of us sort of like, they can't cancel us all, or, you know, we have enough backing from institutional players. I think we're kind of still waiting for that inflection point. And once that happens, I think it happens all very quickly. But that's kind of to finish up on that thought from before.
Right. So I think it's a matter of identifying what we can do now. I think we have a lot of resources that just aren't mobilized. Like I was saying, we have a lot of idle villagers who could be put to use. I think a think tank, this is something we discussed when I went up to Chicago. That's just an obvious thing that would benefit everyone. If there was just a physical space that we controlled, that we could bring people in who were human, elite human capital, who had demonstrated excellence in one regard or another, and rotate those people in and out, like a content house, but for high IQ right wingers, and they could constantly be putting out new ideological work. They could be kind of keeping the conversation fresh. That's another thing. We've kind of seen a decline of more of the high IQ theory content, as there's been more of just like ordinary people.
This person's name is Super Nico.
Go down to the least common denominator. But at the same time, like, we can't abandon that harder theoretical edge. And maybe a content house like that doesn't influence everyone, but maybe it does keep people from going to the competing tech bro faction or like the Zionist Bapsphere. And so I think something like that, there's, to my mind, no reason why that shouldn't already exist. Like, real estate is a good investment beyond that. There's nothing wrong with owning a place and running a content business out of it. Like, Alex Jones has a studio. He is basically streaming 24/7. And you have your show, and you do a great job with your show. You cover certain major news stories, but there's also, I feel like there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit where we could be putting out content that anyone in any local area would, like, people here pay so much attention to what's going on in local electoral politics or just, crime in the area. So we were thinking, we might do a local newspaper in our own area from our perspective. And so, like, if we could have more professionalized media content production hubs, I think that it would be a much wider net that ultimately people would fall into. So it doesn't have to cost millions of dollars. It's really a matter of maintaining the physical spaces where this is done. All you need is a fiber optic internet connection. We have that down a dirt road in Arkansas. It doesn't take a $1 million, $10 million studio to create content that will make a real difference. And in my experience, people need deadlines, they need incentives, they need a schedule, they need leadership, and we've relied on decentralized content production all this time. But I don't think, that's not how mainstream media operates, for a reason. The best practice is to get a crew together and get working. So a think tank, a content creation hub, things like this, I think, would be very valuable. Also, community centers. Like, there's a very strong legal precedent for the ability of country clubs to discriminate if they choose. You don't have to dock the location of these community centers, but, like, we have guys in our network with the resources to crowdsource places where we can build that sense of organic community. We can invite people outside of our ideological spheres into our spaces, into our communities. So those are the sorts of things, like, I don't see any reason to refrain from all that kind of work. So I guess, where do you draw the line? What are the sorts of projects that we could mobilize our people now versus what constitutes too much risk, or what should we not be doing?
Well, I think that I tend to encourage people to take the initiative. I think that, a lot of people, the biggest question I get on my show, and I hate it, people super chat me at the end of the show every night, and they say, well, what are we going to do? Tell me what to do. I want to work for you. I want to do something. And, I almost feel like at this stage in the game, it's like a startup. It's almost like a tech startup. And I look at it in the sense that we don't have a ton of bandwidth. We don't have a ton of resources. There's not a lot of room for fat. There's not a lot of room for extra. We're not like Walmart, where you can, people can kind of get lost in how vast it is. And so you almost need everybody that's involved to be a Swiss Army knife. And they almost kind of need to be an independent node, so to speak. I don't know that there's too many roles, because there are so many people that would say, hey, I'm really gung-ho and maybe I'd like to do something, but maybe lack skills or maybe lack any kind of initiative. There's no ability to, like, initiate projects or initiate anything. And I wonder how valuable that is at this stage in the game. I value at this point more the super intelligent, entrepreneurial. They don't even necessarily need to be super intelligent, but maybe more entrepreneurial, maybe, like you said, have a leadership capability, and people that are going to say, you know what, I'm going to take my skill set, like you said, maybe it's a newspaper, maybe it's a publishing house, maybe they do a live stream, and they say, I'm going to start something myself, because I encounter so many people I meet up with people all the time across the country who they're working a normal job, they watch my show, and then they start their own project, whether it's a nonprofit or they start a book club or they start a campus organization or whatever. And then I kind of go and meet, and there's like a whole other world that I don't know about. It's a group of people that I've never met, but they're all big fans. They're all kind of on board with the doctrine. And they say, these are our plans. This is what we're doing. We took over this, we took over that. And this is how we did it. And this is our plans for expansion. And I think that in my mind, it's almost more like a confederation at this point. And so it's like you have these little scenes in different cities, in different states, different age levels, some in politics, some in the private sector. And I look at it as sort of like a patchwork that eventually we're going to knit together. That eventually over time, it's like I was talking about before, this like slow and steady creep, the kind of tentacles going everywhere, that eventually it reaches this critical mass. And eventually people are kind of, it's unavoidable to encounter each other when you're in the business of politics or some other such thing. And so for me, when you talk about kind of utilizing the villagers, it's beyond the scope of either of our organizations at this point. You know what I'm saying? Like, as far as you're concerned, you have a franchise model where you have a system. And I think that you want eventually to have other people kind of take that program and start their own thing. It's sort of like open source software. I'm going to take the legal model you have, and I'm going to start my intentional community over here, because you can't manage all of them. You know, we don't have big enough staff or budget or bandwidth. And same with me. You know, I do a show every night. I do a number of other projects. I can't run every college Republican chapter and every little thing. It's almost incumbent on us to create a sort of officer class. It's sort of like a cadre. That's kind of the word that sticks out in my mind, is like a cadre. It's a country of 350 million people. We're going to need like 100,000 professional revolutionaries, so to speak, or people that are not just the grug level, you know, pardon the expression. They're not bricklayers. They're not people that need to be told what to do, but people that could conceivably be middle management or entrepreneurial. And it's like, once we get 1,000, 5,000 of those guys, those are going to be the kind of party officials, party apparatchiks, as an analogy. And I'm kind of interested in inspiring those people, indoctrinating those people. They watch a show, they get the ideas, they get the inspiration, they kind of take a project into their own hands. I think about even like with my show, people love the show. They say, what can I do? I say, start a clipping channel. That's something so basic where it's like anyone can learn video editing. Anybody can take the 5 hours it takes to learn a video editing software on an iPhone and start an Instagram account and start pushing out the clips. And they're not always going to be perfect, and some get traction and some don't. But that's something that's like such an imminent thing that you can do on your phone. And like you said, it doesn't need to be big budget or high tech. You could just start and just do that, generate an income, support the show. And that's just like one example of, why don't you tell me what you can do? You like the show? Okay, clip the show. You like books? Okay, there's another guy who watches the show. He started a Telegram channel, and this guy, like a machine, churns out PDFs of books, of like old Catholic books, old far-right books. And his Telegram is now like a library. I use it as a resource. And he super chatted one day. I told him, I said, you start the Telegram. I'm not going to do it. You do it. And he did it, and now it's like a thing. And so it's like, rather than, I like your analogy of the villagers, but or the workers, so to speak. I would maybe add on that and say, how do we tap into the minds? How do we get them to act as sort of like independent, self-improving agents in the system? That's, to me, how we really take advantage of the full breadth of the human capital. So that's my perspective on it, but I think maybe we're in agreement on that also.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You need people with agency for your organization to run efficiently, but there is the issue of scale. With a patchwork or a confederacy, you can have a bunch of self-starters doing parallel projects, but there's a reason why Amazon is hyper successful or Walmart is hyper successful, because they vertically integrate, they organize across different domains, they meet their own supply needs in their kind of production chains. And we can do the same thing. And I think if we're going to have to scale to the extent necessary, we will ultimately have to. So in order to do that, like, I look at what does it take to support that high human capital, high IQ, high agency person who is going to start their own thing regardless. Well, they need housing, they need food, and ordinary people who aren't self-starters, like, we can get into creating residential communities for people like that. They don't all have to be down dirt roads in Arkansas. They can be in more urban areas ultimately. But I look at it also like a real-time strategy game. What are the resources coming in? And how are we spending those resources? You need to spend your resources in a way that's going to amplify how many resources you're getting, and where it's not simply an expense going out into the background. And right now, like all of our money that comes in, it just goes out into the background of the general economy. I think, again, I would bring up the Muslim Brotherhood or the madrasa model, or some of these, like, not that I want to emulate the terrorism, but some of these terrorist groups, like, they have training centers, camps, they have communities that support them and subsidize their training, their indoctrination, and their logistical support. They have that on the ground support. Also, political campaigns, like, again, Patriot Front, one of the things they can do, because they have practiced mobilizing, whether you approve of the way that they appear in public or not, they're able to get people out on the streets. They're able to get people to go out and door knock and contribute to campaigns in a way that no other organization currently can do. I don't think that's the totality of what needs to be done, but I think you need both the high human capital, you need logistical support for them. So how can we put those pieces together? How can we put Grug Brain, 100 IQ bricklayers in an economic process with the high human capital, content creator, lawyer, doctor, revolutionary? I think there are ways of putting it all together, and somebody does need to build the hierarchy. It's like, you shouldn't have to do it all. I shouldn't have to do it all, but someone has to kind of lay down the command and get the thing started. I've found that having some kind of either an online space where there is an owner, there's a manager of that online space, or a physical space where there is a board of managers, there's some kind of concrete hierarchy, the rest, like, people fall into place very naturally. Delegation just happens over time. When you're dealing with a bunch of self-starters and one kind of figurehead, I think it's a very workable model, obviously, for what you're doing. And I don't mean to criticize you, and that you're one of the only people that, are doing something. You're making a real difference. So I don't mean to rag on you for not doing more, but the limitation of that kind of model is that, you have to specifically tell everyone, hey, you should be doing this or that. There's not one kind of general process or best practice that has been followed by many people before, like, going up the ranks at Walmart. They know what to look for promotions. They know what sorts of projects they need people working on. In the military, it's just self-evident, like, here are the tasks that need done. And the reason that it works like that is that they've defined spaces that are continually inhabited, that are regulated by rule, right? I mean, to be really right-wing is to be nomian as opposed to antinomian. And so we support law. We have to institute law for ourselves in order to formalize. I'm sounding a little bit like Yarvin here, but I mean, I think not all of his contributions have been bad, really. I'm not aligned with him in terms of his interests, but, I'll take what I can get from any source, really. So those are some of my thoughts. I think, if we can impose our own laws, like here we have our own articles of association, our LLC bylaws, we have processes for getting new communities started. And my secretary, or our secretary here at Return to the Land, Peter Siri, has really pushed me thinking more in this way, because, I was inclined to be much less formal with things and more, well, we'll just have a conversation about it, and whoever wants to do this, who feels like volunteering or whatever. And Peter kind of insisted, like, no, we need to keep track of hours and make sure everyone's compensated fairly and sign explicit legal contracts, where it's not ambiguous who owes whom money and who's doing the lion's share of the work. So I think that process of formalization, it has risks associated, but without it, I don't know that it's possible to really scale.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that, I think the opposite is true, only because, and again, maybe this is colored by my experience. I'll give you an example. I went to Texas a couple of years ago to meet with some people. And I don't want to get too much into the details because it was super controversial, but I went down there to meet with some people that are involved in, like, Texas politics, and somebody heard that I was going to show up there at this office building where they do their business, and they told the press. Somebody heard that I was going to be visiting this office. They called up the Texas Star Tribune. They said, oh, Nick Fuentes is going to meet with so-and-so at this office at this time. And a journalist literally waited in the parking lot hidden inside of a car or something and staked out the building all day and took photos of me entering the building and exiting the building. Now, they don't know who I met with. People still don't know to this day. That people make things up about what happened there. And they didn't even get me in a picture with the people I was meeting with. All they got was a photo of me leaving the building. And the Texas state legislature passed like a bill condemning me over this. And like people were fired, and it turned into this like nuclear bomb in like Texas state politics. And that's the level of, to get back to the earlier point of like intensity of how they try to thwart, in particular, my plans by association. And so, you know, maybe it's not a general principle, but speaking from experience, I could not operate that way. And it's because it's fragile, you know, the anti-fragile versus the fragile distinction. If I'm sort of in a top-down, let's say for my sake, I'm in a top-down organization and the laws and the expectations are promulgated from the top. All it takes, and this has happened to me, all it takes is one disgruntled grug. Doesn't get enough attention. They don't get enough water and sunshine. You know, they get the cold shoulder. They blow up the whole thing. Oh, this is who's this guy. This is the chief of staff. This is a donor. This is so-and-so. This is where they operate. This is how they work. This is what they told me in secret. And the whole thing comes crumbling down. And because it's a formal organization, there's this contagion effect. Everybody that's connected to it is at risk then of being burned. And so, believe me, I would totally prefer a giant company. I would totally prefer something with rank and something with form and everything like that, something with bylaws and all the rest of it. It makes things so much easier. And for scale, you're 100% correct. But I have had to evolve in this space by these outside pressures. It has to be this way, where it has to be so discreet, it effectively has to not exist, or it has to exist in an informal, personal way where it's like secret handshakes and secret clubs and, you know, this thing of ours sort of mentality. You know, there's one rule: we don't talk about this thing that exists. And that's why I really believe that, and not to be cringy, but I think that over time, you have enough of these little cliques and little kind of worlds that are created, and they bleed into each other. That's sort of like the visual analogy is you have a little scene in LA, you have a little scene in DC, you have a little scene at Harvard or wherever. And over time, they all start to sort of bleed into each other, run into each other. And that's where the patchwork starts to get sewn together. I don't think it's time yet for us to be doing anything formal or out in the open. I think in your case, it's unique because of the legal precedent that you're fighting to establish. I think that's a worthy battle. But at least in terms of the nationwide, at least coming from my perspective, what I'm trying to build, I don't think it's time yet. Because let's say we created a membership organization, and when everything's good, everything's good. But the second that something goes wrong, the whole house of cards comes tumbling down, because it turns into, you know, such and such is getting an email. Oh, this guy was in white nationalist Nick Fuentes' group. Oh, this person was located at the office. There was a mole and they found everybody in the group chat. Like, you know, even that guy, Basil, I don't know if you're familiar with him, but Basil was this gay Afghan Twitter poster, and his pseudonym was Basil, and he was all over the BAT network. He was all over identifying all these guys and how they're all related and so on. They found his docs, and he turns out to be this lawyer in, I think, New York City, and he's a high-powered lawyer, super wealthy. And he has all the plausible deniability in the world. He's not a right-wing extremist. He's like a gay brown guy, he's a gay Afghan. And he still had to burn his Twitter account because they sent an email to his job. And they said, oh, this guy's, you know, he's an extremist, such and such. And so even the extremely important work that he was doing had to be killed, and it's a Twitter account, because they found the pain mechanism, they struck at the heart of it, and they made it impossible for him. And so I'm just always thinking about that because, and this last thing, at the end of the day, you know, a buddy of mine told me this: the movement can only live and succeed if it helps people to achieve their own goals. And it's like you said, what are people's goals? They want to have a house, they want to have food, they want to find a wife, they want to find community. And as long as the organization is helping them get to their goals, it's good, and they'll be a part of it. But the second that it becomes prohibitive, they're out. And I experienced that firsthand. I think maybe you overestimate people's willingness to risk, because for me, at least, after January 6th, A lot of people that I thought were down with the struggle, they scattered like rats the second that they thought they might go to jail or that they couldn't find a wife, and the time was running out. They're getting to be 30 years old and they're not married and they're in this thing. They've got to get some motion going. So we always have to bear in mind, like, yes, people have a risk tolerance and there's some expectation there. But if the organization can't provide for people, if the risk is not mitigated to a very large extent, it's going to be hard to call on people to be with us for a long time. And that's just from my personal experience.
Right. And there will be that risk that people will have options taken away, which is why I think the kind of organizing that needs to take place is building up from the foundation economically, where there will be roles for people regardless of what industry they happen to be in. We have experts in engineering. I know people who have their own businesses, manufacturing various components and things like that. We can hire our own guys in spaces like that. We can pay for our own lawyers if we scale sufficiently. We can't employ all the lawyers on our side probably. But the bigger we grow with communities, community centers, recreational lands, that's my personal mission, is to create these spaces that will create economic opportunities, allow for networking, and also just like build that intangible quality of community that we've lost. Don't lose sight, I guess, of the big picture. Like, why do we care about this? What are we even trying to do? Well, we've lost an integrated, homogenous culture that we carried forward from our European roots over thousands of years of unspoken, communication, the way that we engage with one another, that unspoken, implicit language of just common culture, familiarity, kin, that's been broken down, and we just don't have it. We didn't grow up with it. Not in the way that, a few generations ago our ancestors had it. So because of that, like, if we defer actually having the physical community spaces and being in organizations together, we're not going to build up those skills that will ultimately allow a movement to succeed. Like, if it's always atomized individuals, and I know that's not exactly what you're promoting, but if we don't create physical spaces and virtual spaces and hierarchies to inhabit, then we're not going to build back up that language of common discourse, community etiquette, that has been lost. And I see that with the people who come down here. Some of the people are a little bit socially awkward at first. They're, preoccupied with ideological things. And then over time, they do real work. They start thinking more pragmatically. They start thinking about, okay, what's it actually going to take to start a family for myself? Or what is this community going to physically look like in a few years? And, their priorities shift. The way they carry themselves shifts. They mature. And I think something like that is possible at the elite human capital and with schools, formal institutions, even just a camp somewhere. I think there's a huge level of communication that remains, bodily, that maybe even there's like parapsychological communication that happens between people in person. I've always felt that. I think when people are actually in a physical space together and they create that bond together, you don't know what you're missing until you create those spaces and have common goals that you're actually working towards. So I think it's about, like, you can't defer refining that intangible quality of common culture, etiquette, language that has been broken down, and we just don't understand what it is that we're missing. And so we connect on this abstract intellectual level rather than a person-to-person level, and I think it's going to take personal fidelity. It's like we don't know how to have loyalty, true loyalty to people in our lives anymore. And part of that is why something like, RTTL is even possible, because people aren't rooted. They're willing to pick up and move and do something radically different. And so but the only way to actually get that off the ground is to start by being very top-down, hierarchical in your structure and explicit in how you're organizing. But it doesn't have to be in every avenue, and there's plenty of room for discretion and compartmentalization. And you don't want a fragile system where one failure point topples the whole thing. So I get the caution, and I'm very much for not being overly centralized. But then also, like, I don't want to get into a trap where we overestimate the amount of elite human capital we genuinely do have. Like, you meet the best and brightest, and you can be choosy and only talk to the very best and brightest. But I'd be surprised if it was hundreds of people like that ultimately that you're engaged with, that you've spoken with. And so, I mean, in a lot of domains, we get a small sample of what's out there and kind of generalize and think, oh, this can just like apply at scale. This is how it is. And I think we should be, I guess, more humble about the human capital that we actually have and the capacity it has for self-starting and developing. I think people need schools, people need camps, they need places where they learn how to build those bonds of loyalty and the skills of communication and leadership and how to follow appropriately. So I'm being very vague here in like what it is that's missing, but that intangible quality, how do you look after that and create that?
No, I agree with you. I think that I agree with everything you're saying. I guess it's just in terms of the political solution, you're talking more about kind of creating like a quality of life for people and providing something that's been lost, not even necessarily by diversity, but by modernism in a sense, because it's not even so much the diversity that has scattered us. It is just how society is structured. It's just not a communitarian society. It is an atomized society. And you're talking about kind of building that up from the ground up and kind of taking it local. Starts with a community of a dozen people and, kind of grows organically from there. I'm thinking more in terms of how are we actually going to acquire any kind of political power? And that's why in a very big country, in terms of scale, I'm thinking like, we do need a decentralized network of thousands of people all building things. I'm thinking, how do you build Rome in a day in a sense? It's sort of like you need everybody kind of doing something at all times rather than like, let's build houses in this place. And I just feel like maybe it's motivated by more of an urgency or something like that. Because you're right. I mean, and maybe that is the defect of a decentralized movement, is that you're gonna get less loyalty and less trust, and people's quality of life is going to be as bad as everybody else's, because we're sort of in society, we're in the world and of the world, whereas you're kind of trying to create your own world or recreate a different version of the world. But I don't know, I think that's it gets back to maybe what we said at the beginning, which is about I'm more interested at this stage in creating the movement than about creating the end society, creating the movement to marshal the resources, the human capital, maybe even in some cases good governance, changing attitudes, kind of like this all-encompassing approach before we actually break ground. Although I don't think it's not to say that what you're doing is without value. It's just that in a way you're almost a part of the patchwork that I'm talking about, in a sense that, you have people that are at an elite school and some people in government and some people doing this. And yes, there are also intentional communities, and they're all going to kind of walk simultaneously towards their respective goals. And then one day we'll coalesce. So I don't think there's, anything mutually exclusive. It's just you as someone who is, your goal is to create a culture, and you're also interested in construction, which I learned about you. You're a true builder. You want to build structures, you want to build things. That's maybe your aptitude in your direction. And then other people, they want to do a tech startup. Other people, their lifelong dream is to be in government. And it's like, how do we provide value for those people that don't necessarily want to do like a startup community and that sort of thing? They have other goals in mind. I'm interested in kind of inspiring everybody to take it where they want to go. I think, and maybe it comes from a recognition, although I think you recognized it too, that it's such a young and undeveloped movement. That's sort of that was the problem that I discovered, is there's such a lack of development. It's so immature in a sense. And by that, I don't mean, juvenile, although it is a lot of young people, but there's just this lack of, you said the word refinement, development. And I guess I'm kind of trying to create as much action and get as many people kind of linked in or tapped into it to spur on some development, because I just survey the landscape and it's like, what do we have? American Renaissance, VDare, Culture Wars magazine. You got these things like Patriot Front, Return of the Land, you have my show. But after so many years, there's just very little. And it's not to knock anybody's achievements, but it's to say, you'd think that there'd be more at this point after Trump and after the alt-right and all these things. So I just want to see more institutions and more people and more money. I just want to see it grow. And I think that maybe, not to say getting hung up is the wrong word, but saying we're going to do a community here and we're going to work on a language for 15 people in this, or 50 people or 100 people in the specific plot of land. I don't know that that's achieving the scale that you're talking about. I think we kind of need to get everybody into it. You know what I'm saying?
We do, yeah. Everyone needs to be involved from top to bottom. So I think we need both the top-down approach and a bottom-up approach simultaneously. When it comes to like where the elite human capital is living, are they renting apartment buildings or units? Well, we can crowdfund apartment buildings and house multiple of these people who are ideologically aligned in one living space, so that it's not a matter where they go to work and work for the system, and then they go home and they're surrounded by diversity, and then for like 2 hours online they watch your show and they think that like compensates for them not living according to their values. I think we can manage to afford the opportunity for those people to live up to their values, to practice that everyday language of loyalty, respect, hierarchy, tradition, etc., without really sacrificing that much. We're not there yet. Like, we don't have the resources to be buying apartment buildings, and we don't have the legal infrastructure to do it efficiently yet. But that's what RTTL is working towards. So it's, yes, we're starting here on one patch of land in the Ozarks, but we want a lot of other patches of land in other parts of the country, as well as urban developments and like whole suburban neighborhoods ultimately. So let me just pitch you also another thing, not that this is something you need to do, it's something that I need to do, that I'm working towards. So I'm taking this tour, going around the country in the near future, helping to organize more land buys for community centers, recreational land, and the residential communities. But at the same time, because I can't like door knock and advertise for RTTL because of fair housing restrictions, I can, however, advertise for political rallies on the ground that aren't announced up front. It would just be a matter of recruiting grassroots, just like you're door knocking for a candidate. Door knock, citizens concerned about demographic change, and if you can get 12, 20 people from some city somewhere to show up to a park, maybe you convert 2 of them to realize like, yes, this is a real issue. We have to do something about that. I feel that sense of urgency really desperately. And this is the kind of on-the-ground operation that can only be performed with local logistical support. So if we create community hubs where we have people who are practiced in that language of common culture and who know all of the lines and know all the rhetoric that is actually effective, if you're going to go door knocking and recruiting new people, I think it just strengthens us overall from the bottom, and also it allows the people at the top to live up to their values. Because I think there's a big psychological toll in preaching one thing and living another way. I don't think you can be as efficient as you possibly can be if that contradiction exists in your life. And also, I guess, like, it's just a moral imperative that we build the culture that our children will inhabit. I think people are cognizant, elites are cognizant of that mismatch, and they'll be tempted in one of 2 directions. Either they'll want to quit their job and like move to RTTL or something, or and I don't think you have to quit your job to do that, or they will simply dive wholly into their work and join the system. And plenty of people do that too. It's like there's attrition from people giving up on the struggle. There's also attrition where people just flip sides. And I think that's the reason that the West is in our current situation, is that our elites had more loyalty to other elites, their elite status, than they had to average white people. So I guess I'm concerned about that hazard. A, that our elites will be living double lives, not morally consistent with themselves, and B, that they're going to follow in the same course that other Western elites followed and betray the base.
I don't know. I just feel like people like the world. People like actually the way that things are. I mean, I think that we don't like diversity. We don't like crime. But like, I'm going to be honest with you, when I go to Los Angeles, like, I love that city, and I'm willing to say, yeah, I can't leave my bag parked in my car, and yeah, I got to be concerned about certain things, but I like going there. I like the food. I like the lots of people. I like the excitement. And a lot of people like the world. And it's like, it's a question of how do you make it attractive for people to really want to be a part of it? I guess that's kind of, in a way, I sort of am a student of Trump, where Trump says you got to make it sexy, you got to make it hot, you got to. People want to be in the world, and I don't know how much this proposal of we're going to return to the land, we're going to take you out of the world, we're going to remove you from the world and put you in this place. And it's not, you're obviously still alive in the world, but it's like you're not in society. I feel like maybe my disagreement is I like society. I think other people like society, and I think what they like about it is, there's a reason that things are the way they are. There's a reason we live in a very liberal, globalized world. And we can say that our country is being killed. It's not killing itself. And like, it's the elites that are making it this way. I don't know. I think people do it's attractive, a lot of the things. They like the attractions. They like the recreation. They like, on some level, the multiculturalism. They like excitement. And so I'm just saying, like, for people that are really, not even just for the elite human capital, but for anybody, it's like they also want familiarity. They're of this world. Like it or not, we're of the world. Are people really drawn to like a hard reset where I just question of how attractive is the offer where it's like, you're going to eat your porridge. It's like, hey, listen up, you're going to get in line. You're going to work for me. You're going to eat your porridge. It doesn't have any sugar or cinnamon or spices. We're going back to the land and you're going to fucking like it because it's your duty. And it's like, and on some level, like, yeah, we're going there, but we kind of need to reach people where they are. And it almost reminds me of like, it's like the early Zionist movement, where you're kind of like the Zionist that's saying, we're going to go and work on farms in Palestine. And the Jews are like, Palestine? We like New York. We like America. We like Europe. We like living in degeneracy and filth. We like this kind of stuff. And it's not to say that, and I'm not knocking the project, but I would say maybe, and this is my unsolicited advice, if I were doing what you're doing, and we have this discussion, because let's use this as the example. We both wanted to start a school because we both see the value of, look, the young people need to be taught. They do need to be I include myself in that. I would like, you are much more educated than me on philosophy. Someone like yourself could tutor someone like me. There's a value in that, and we need to get people there. But the way that you explained it is you said we need the whole experience. We need a true, like, Platonic academy where it encompasses, we're going to live together, we're going to work out together, it's going to be physical where we're working out, but we're also learning and it's intensive. And my thought was, I want like a 3-month program in a city. And it's like, we're going to live in a fun city and we're going to do a crash course program. We're going to make it attractive and brief so that people can kind of get in and get on with their lives. And I think that kind of symbolizes maybe the disconnect where it's like, I agree in principle with everything you're saying, but I also, I'm not that much younger than you, but knowing these young people even younger than me, it's like, how do we get a perfect SAT score student who gets admitted to Harvard? How do we get them in the doors of our school? And my thought is like, something sexy, something, fun, something exciting, something that's different, striking. It's sort of like Elon Musk doing a sports car for Tesla before he did, an economical car, an economy model car. It's the same thing. It's like, how do we get them into the sports car of being in the right wing, just to kind of give them a taste? And maybe that's just like a difference in approach. Maybe, you're very much more like, we have to do things a certain way. The process is almost the point of it, like going through the process. There's a deep value in that. And me, I'm like, we got to get them through the door. We got to get these numbers up. We got to get them through the door. We got to get them here. We got to get them to want it. So maybe that just reflects a difference in disposition, but I feel like that's maybe, because I'm with you, we want to get everybody there, but it's like, I just worry about the demands we're placing on people in terms of they got to want it first. I want to make them want it. I want to give them that inspiration. And it's not to say that you're not inspiring them, but you're coming at it from like, we have to undergo almost like an unpleasant experience of unattaching ourselves from the world to maybe spiritually refine ourselves. And when you talk about scale, I don't know that that's how you achieve scale. I think that's how you achieve like a Benedictine, monkish order, and you'll get what, you set out to achieve, but it won't be a massive scale.
I think there is a crisis of meaning that if you offer people self-sacrifice that constitutes like purpose for them in their lives, they'll take it. I think that's why people join the military. To some extent, that's like why people go into the sciences, they become doctors, because they don't want to shy away from the struggle. They want to go to school for 8 years and do very difficult things. And I don't think the yacht at the end of the day is really what's motivating them. I was about to go full on blood sports, but then you said I could maybe teach you Play-Doh, so we can remain pals for now. But no, I think, yes, we do need to recognize what people are really motivated by. I just think they're motivated by a sense of deep purpose and integration in life. Like when it comes down to it, at a superficial level, they're motivated by daily comforts and just, like status. And we don't have to move away from elevating high quality people and celebrating accomplishment. I think, whatever we create, it needs to be something that status seeking people want to join. I think that's really what it comes down to. We don't need to feed them Tex-Mex and burritos and have skyscrapers. Although we can also aspire to build our own skyscrapers. We can have unique types of architecture when we scale to a sufficient level, when we have investment organizations, when we build out a legal framework through membership organizations that are collecting funds, that are paying staffs of lawyers to do this in a secure way. Then people easily can chip in $1,000, $2,000 into crowdfunding projects like that, novel urban architecture, and get a return on that investment rather than a wholly donation based kind of paradigm like we're currently in for the most part. So I think we can create that high status role for people. What did the ancient Greeks do? They had a model where they were able to found colonies through entrepreneurial people, self-starters going out and settling raw land or conquering existing lands in some cases. And it was certainly a sacrifice in their quality of life, but they did it. And because they did it, they became the predominant power in the Mediterranean world for a couple centuries. They permanently changed world history because they were driven by their pursuit of honor, not comfort. And I think those two things need to be well distinguished. Plato, here we go into Platonic education for now. Rational mind, thumatic spirit, and epithumedicon or appetite. People are driven by their desires. Most people are driven by their desires. And so it can seem like, this is what you have to appeal to create a mass movement. And at some level, that's right. But there's also a virtue of well-ordered appetite. And to be really appealing, you can get people to understand that living in a cleaner, healthier, better way is going to satisfy their appetites actually more. Yes, LA is still, I grew up, south of LA, so I know what it's like, and it has degraded over the course of my life. But it's still an appealing place. It still has the beach nearby. Yes, the food is still very good, but you just have to get people to realize, 15, 20, 30 years down the line, what is this place going to look like? It looks fundamentally different now than it did when I was a small child 30 years ago. So it's like you have to appeal to people's appetite regulated by reason. You have to appeal to people's status seeking, their desire for honor regulated by reason, where we want you to pursue the honor that is beneficial, not just what gets you famous on the internet. And I know you're a fan of Andrew Tate. I actually don't disagree with a lot of his takes, but he promotes a very degenerate lifestyle. And he does that because he is a thumatic personality. He's a spirited emotion kind of person, and he wants to go out and conquer. And that drive in itself comes from a good place, but we can't just meet people where that kind of naively occurs for them. We can't meet people where appetite naively occurs to them, or will become pornographers and polygamists like Andrew Tate. So we have to, capitalize on those desires like you're rightly intuiting we ought to do. I don't know what it looks like precisely, but here, when we have events, we have games. We have competitions, debate competitions, chess competitions, we have talent shows, and that's the kind of stuff the ancient Greeks did. They had their theatrical competitions, even philosophical competitions. So, in general, I'm very in favor of let's emulate the ancient Greeks. It's what the Jews did, in a lot of ways. So I think if we go back to the source, we'll find some answers.
I don't know. I feel like because I'm just thinking out loud here, I just guess, when you say something like we want a cleaner, healthier society, my ears kind of perk up because you think about something that's kind of progressive and like forward oriented. And I imagine if there's like if there's an intentional community where there's a real attraction, like let's say, you know, it's modeled after the Greeks, and I'm not giving you unsolicited advice, I would never do that, but if you had like a Parthenon, you know, or like a model of like a Greek styled academy, truly magnificent and beautiful, I feel like everybody would flock to go. It would be the beating heart of the town. Or if there was something like a really cool style of architecture, micro, or what do they call them? Tiny homes. And, you know, or something like a forward thinking, it's solar panels and it's like a Thomas Massey. Everyone has a Thomas Massey style home. It's like, those are the kinds of things I think that motivate people, or at least people like myself, or even people like yourself also, to say, we're going to go and see it. We're going to go and see it, how they live, how it's different, how they're pushing forward. I guess maybe to your point, maybe we are in more agreement than we think. It really is about providing that kind of like deeper, what is the intentional community going to have that the outside world doesn't? Because I think whites only, like as a negative, propositionally negative, like, well, it's not going to have black people, it's not going to have these problems. It's not enough, because we go to LA because of what it does have, which is natural beauty, the beaches, the food. And you got to answer, what is the intentional community going to have? And it can't just be this tautological, well, the community is going to have community. It's going to have people singing songs in a circle. It's got to have like, because we take pride in the cathedral in the center, or the Parthenon, or the debate club, or in our technology, or in our something. And it's like, if we can answer that question of what the society has, people will be drawn to it. And people, the best will say, I want to be near where they built this. I want to be near where they're doing this, where they're not doing it like everybody else. And if you have 100 of those, that's your like confederation, and that's the true renaissance in a sense. So I don't even think we disagree. Maybe it's just in terms of marketing. You know, like if you market it as like, hey man, we have a talking dog. We have a talking dog. The talking dog at the Shell Shack can sing. You know, that people would make a pilgrimage. We have a giant cube in the middle. That's maybe where my mind is at, is like, where's the attraction? Where's the fountain? Where's the public square? And I think your mind is there. It's just a matter of arriving at that destination. It just takes time to get there. But I think we're maybe pointed in the same direction in that way.
Yeah, I think so. So we're going to crowdfund recreational lands. That's a big thing that I've been thinking about. Like, appeal to people's desire to not be around people who are playing loud music on their cell phone speakers, who are speaking other languages at the beach, at the river. Like, give them a good time. Give them the kind of experience they had when they were kids. Also, community centers, not simple like metal building rec centers, but something, you know, more kind of beautiful and inspiring. And that's difficult. As you know, I thought a lot about alternative construction methods, and then we got down here and started building cabins and started building larger homes, and realized like, okay, the basic stick frame construction methods that everybody uses, they use for a reason, because it's a lot cheaper, a lot faster, and time and money are scarce. So, but I do think, like, I also believe in that. I think we shouldn't just be crowdfunding rec centers and, you know, parks and things like that. We should be crowdfunding obelisks. Like, we absolutely should be doing megalithic construction. I think that is a path to real power. I mean, that's what the ancients did. Why'd they build the pyramids? It's like it's some big mystery. It's like, no, you see it from miles away, and you know that whoever did this was a great man, or a great civilization, a great culture, and there's someone that, you know, deserves respect and admiration, and we should follow them. And, you know, the other ancients followed the Egyptians. The Greeks looked up to them. So yeah, I totally agree. As far as like what that looks like, I think we have to find the right balance of what is worthwhile to formalize, what's safe to formalize, what battles we can actually win, and don't be naive and think that we won't get sued if we try to create, you know, membership, activist organizations. Realize you will be sued, but build in a very resilient way, in a compartmentalized way, where one node of failure doesn't bring down the whole system. So yeah, it's maybe a difference in marketing, also a difference in prioritization and prudence of, you know, what step do you follow next? And I'm really afraid of the tendency for inaction. Like, you do your show, you're very active, you're out there, you're doing other shows, you're evangelizing our messages. And just as an aside, a lot of people like didn't want me to speak with you. They were glad that I had the falling out with you, and they said that I wouldn't. They wouldn't want to work with me if I spoke with you. And I think that's ridiculous because clearly you have promoted our ideas more effectively than any other single person. I don't agree with everything. I wouldn't want to live in LA now. You would. That's a fairly substantial disagreement. But it's if you think that you can't work with someone because, like, okay, you're a quarter Mexican, you have a Spanish last name, like, you're also more than 75% white. You also like embody certain European virtues better than most European people. We have to get over the idea that we're waiting for perfect people. We're not going to have perfect leaders. We're not going to have perfect peers or followers. Like, you're going to be disappointed. If you've been in the movement long enough, you're going to be disappointed by people. I think you've been less of a disappointment than many other people who have come around and tried to run a show or run a political party. I mean, there's been a lot of disappointment in our spheres. So I think you have to count your blessings and be willing to work with people. So whatever, slight disagreements we may have on tactics, I think you got to work with people where you can. I'm also willing to work with, the Black intentional community people in Georgia. A few months ago they did that. The media was very positive about it. Like, we should have a confederation of intentional communities of all different ethnic types. Because people deserve that self-respect to have their own space. And if we can universalize that and then petition the America Party or whatever it is to, like, hey, this needs to be like a central thing in your platform. Look at this coalition. We have Asians, we have everybody. Then we can maybe do things. So, like, people just, when it comes to politics, if you're an ideological purist, you're not going to make it. You have to look at it as relationships and alliances and friends and enemies. And, like, if you can't count Nick Fuentes as a friend, you're just not looking hard enough, because obviously you've benefited us. So anyway, just as that aside, like, it bothered me that I got a few messages from people who, like, took issue with this. But anyway, I mean, we've sort of addressed, like, the main stuff that I wanted to address. My thing is, I want to get out there. I want to start this tour. I want to get real estate acquired and have spaces where we can start meeting up and doing things. I want to see a content house. I want to see a think tank actually realized. And I'm willing to compromise on my end, and maybe we can work together. Maybe other people who hear this, you have another project. I talk to a lot of people with, side projects or this or that in different areas. And they can't all succeed. They do all need some level of quality control. Because there are a lot of scammers out there. That's another kind of danger of decentralization. It's really discouraging also seeing, like, in these spaces, I don't know the details of the situation, but, like, the Stu Peters rug pull thing, that was pretty sad. A lot of people believed in him, and supposedly he basically stole a lot of money from them. And yeah, that's someone who had a big name in our spheres, and a lot of people put faith in him. So those are the factors that need to be balanced. What struggles can we actually win? How can we organize without risking everyone's well-being? And yeah, how can we build that loyalty and trust and quality control? So I don't have nearly, half of the answers for how to do that. And the more I've actually worked in community, the more I realize that my kind of preconceptions of what it's going to look like are never right. It's always in the process with everyone at the table that things kind of take shape and come together. So I don't know if you just want to spin off whatever I said there. We should probably wrap up, because I think we've pretty much come to that conclusion point. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Totally. Yeah, no, I mean, look, there is a significant element on our side, and this is something that, if you're in it, you deal with it. There is this just very negative element that's always kind of like chirping, that's vulgar and crass, and you can't do this, and you can't talk to this one, and I don't like this one. And I've always taken the approach of, we just need to be open. We need to be open to people. We need to be open to progress. We kind of just need that can-do, all hands on deck mentality. And unless you have somebody that's, like, completely ideologically opposed or, like, super toxic and problematic or whatever, it's like, I'm willing to talk to and work with people towards the common mission. And as long as there's broad agreement, I think that kind of mentality that just is like, no, not good enough, can't be that, and by the way, with no, like, forward animus. It's one thing to say, we need higher standards, or, we should do more. It's another thing to just be against. And so I basically just tuned that out for a long time. I think that there's always been a low boil of that. It goes without saying, but you're in extreme politics and you're going to get a lot of antisocial people and people that are deliberately transgressive and people that have all kinds of problems. And that's always existed at a low boil. And you just kind of have to think about, we want winners. We want winners we get along with. We want winners that are going to be part of the solution rather than not, or part of the problem. And and even as far as you're concerned, I mean, like you said, we don't agree on everything, but I believe in what you're doing. I believe we have so much in common, like 90 compared to anybody else, 99% in common, basically. And so it's always just a struggle, honestly, for attitude and perspective, even to the extent that we had a beef. I'm sure at one point or another, whether it's this beef or other beefs, you wake up and say, why are we beefing with these people? We agree with them on 99%, especially compared to your average person. And there's just so little time and so few of us and so little resources. We just have to have this coalition of the willing, honestly. And so I'm here for it. But yeah, I thought this was a good discussion. I think, and it's like you said, there's a tremendous amount of humility because it's such a complex and vast problem. In a way, it's like all problems distilled into one. We're talking about human nature. How do we appeal to people? How do we get people to, are we going to go with the world or totally against the world? And there's so much humility involved because we don't have all the answers and we're not going to settle all the answers through a discussion. You kind of develop the answers over time through experience, solving problems, putting your heads together, and even solving the minutia. Sometimes the devil's in the details. So anyway, I continue to support your work. I'm going to support the tour. Maybe you'll come to Chicago. I got to return to the land. I'll come and visit you soon. I'll bring the recipes. We'll have burritos at Return to the Land, and white people can make them. They'll be good. I'll stay out of the kitchen. You don't need Mexicans making burritos. White people can make the burritos, and we'll plant the flag, and we'll continue the movement. The movement lives.
All right. Hey, it was very nice speaking with you, Nick. Let me just ask, would you speak with somebody from Patriot Front privately?
Yeah, maybe privately. Possibly,
okay.
Sure.
Could I set something like that up?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm always open to talking. I'm not going to promise you an outcome, but yeah, I'll talk to him, sure.
Okay, awesome. There's one other thing, if you'll indulge me, just like maybe 5 minutes it'll take.
Sure.
I saw you respond to a super chat where you said, like, people say that central banks are this big control issue. You don't really get the argument. So are you saying, like, the banking system is not a major kind of center of what empowers our enemies, or what's the...
Well, the original super chat was, there's this meme where they say Libya, North Korea, Iran, and Iraq all have a gold standard. They were off the Rothschild banking, and that's why we invaded them. And of course, I said on the show, I was a libertarian for many years, so I do recognize the problem with the Federal Reserve and with fractional reserve banking, and I get all the critiques about it. But as always, it's one of these things where people extrapolate it into one of these conspiracies where it's like, oh, it's the Illuminati. If you talk about the Federal Reserve, you're going to get shot. If you say audit the Fed, you're going to get, the CIA special. You're going to get 2 bullets to the back. You're going to get suicided with 2 bullets to the back of the head. And I'm like, yeah, that's just obviously in my opinion, the locus of power is it's political. It has little to do with the Federal Reserve, although that's a problem.
Okay, what do you think about the idea that just fractional reserve banking in general necessitates a concentration of capital in the hands of the bankers? Like, are you familiar with arguments around that?
Not particularly. I'm not focused on monetary policy, but I'm not necessarily against fractional reserve banking. I'm not necessarily against fiat money or anything like that. I think that money is a tool. So I think that people ascribe a lot of importance to the medium of exchange, and they say things like, well, depending on the money system, it's going to get people to have a high time preference or a low time preference because of how it incentivizes spending or saving. And I guess I'm just not a monetary determinist. I don't believe that the monetary system is it's definitely important, but I don't think that that's really where the reform is going to occur. I don't think it's going to change our lives.
Right. Yeah. My take is just that mathematically, because when they issue new loans, they are creating currency at the same time, and then they have all of that debt paid back to them plus interest, more and more dollars just inevitably flow into the banking system. And the banking system is all kind of centered on the Federal Reserve, which has the lowest interest rate and the cheapest money production, and then the commercial banks that are affiliated get this kind of special privilege, special access to the cheapest money. And so the money supply is mathematically determined to constantly expand, and these particular institutions are the ones that are going to receive that, which basically amounts to an indirect tax on everyone else, because as they inflate the money supply, they're depreciating the value of our dollars. So
I understand the arguments behind that.
You do?
Yeah, I mean, but
okay.
I mean, it's sort of, I guess I don't believe that the problem is a system. I don't think that it's like if we get back to a gold standard that's going to solve our political problem, is my issue with that.
Right. It's just that our enemies wouldn't have as many resources at their disposal. They wouldn't be indirectly taxing all of us, some of our labor and value output. So I guess it emboldens our enemies, and just historically, the people who have been in control of the banking system are not, pro-white people.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's I think it confuses what's causing what. I don't think the fiat money system is causing our predicament. I think it's just kind of like a feature of the ruling class. So, I mean, that's where people kind of get into this. It's kind of inherent in libertarian ideology. It's like they have a problem that we have a ruling class. And, and I understand how inflation's a hidden tax and all that sort of thing, but it's like, to me, that's just having an elite. That's just having money. That's just having a monetary system. And it's problematic because the people who are powerful are our enemies. So I guess in other words, libertarians have a problem with power rather than those who are in power, is I guess,
right.
I'll put it succinctly.
Well, imagine, I guess, if the Treasury was responsible for increasing the money supply and they issued loans to, families who had new children or wanted to, start a homestead and things like that. Like other societies have followed that model. And I think it would be a good way of breaking away from this kind of international network of finance that does constrain options. I get what you're saying, though. I don't think it's like one causes the other. I think it is a feedback cycle, like having these institutions empowers existing elites. So, I mean, I'm not big into crypto, but some people think that, developing alternative currencies, monetary systems, and finance networks could at least, keep us from paying this implicit tax to existing elites and give us more independence. I'm not the guy on that. I was just kind of surprised to hear that was your take on it, so I was curious. Thought I'd throw that in at the end, just for my own sake.
Nice little, it's kind of a big topic to throw in there at the end, but it's too the libertarian ideology, because and here's where it started, is people said, oh, the Federal Reserve is like a Jewish conspiracy. And I'm like, I don't think so. And they said, well, it's all about building Israel and the Rothschilds and they control everything. And I'm like, when you say inflation's a hidden tax, yes, everyone knows that about how the monetary system works. But when people say the Rothschilds made the Federal Reserve to help Israel and that's the center of power, and they do this kind of Mott and Bailey, where they lead with stuff about the Rothschilds and other stuff that isn't true. And there's this Jewish element and the rest of it. But then you really press and it turns into libertarian ideology, which is like, well, we're against centralization of power. And it's like, okay, well, I'm not. I think that the bankers, those that are in charge of the allocation of resources, are always going to be powerful. Those that are in charge, someone's going to be in charge of minting the money. And in a complex, vast society with financial instruments that are monetizing risk and things like that, what system is not going to have a big financial sector or a very attractive financial sector? It's almost utopian to say, farmers are going to be richer than Silicon Valley and Wall Street? What system would not produce that outcome? So that's where I'm like, you get this ideology that seeps in, and it's, anarchist or egalitarian in nature in a certain sense. They want the value to be distributed. I think it's always going to be hierarchical. So.
No, the French physiocrats were onto it. Our currency has to be denominated in acres of land. It's all about land exchange. Okay, no, I think I see your point, and I do think, given the complexity of society, a separate kind of finance sector makes sense. I would just like for it to not be run by merchant usurers, and I'd like it to be more socially conscious and also run by our guys. So I agree. It's more like who controls the institution and what they're using it for than anything else. But now we can actually wrap up. It was a great conversation. We got into a lot. I think it was an important conversation. Apologies for the tech issues. I am not a regular streamer. I'm going to be getting a better setup soon. I'm trying to go more full-time with all this stuff, and I'm going to be active. Feel that sense of urgency. We're all going to work together. We no longer have a choice. Everyone, we're working together. We're going to win. As long as we use everyone's effort, live consistent with our values, and be willing to talk with each other and listen to Nick because he's very smart. I don't need to tell most of the audience that. But... All right. Any last words for the audience, Nick?
No, yeah, likewise. I mean, we're always learning from each other. It's good to exchange ideas and talk, and I'm just glad we're able to squash the beef. I thought it was a great discussion, so I appreciate you having me. I think it was a pretty good time. So thanks a lot, and hopefully I'll see you soon. I'll come down and visit you.
Yeah, you're welcome anytime. All right.
Well, consistency
nice.
is not